What's up, Cheeseheads? As always, thank you for joining me. I do greatly appreciate it. For those of you tuning in for the first time, my name is Paul Brettel. I'm a site editor over at Dairyland Express, where we cover the Packers, Brewers, Bucks, and Badgers. I also have a new article out every Monday and Friday over at Cheesehead TV. Before I dive into today's topic, I just want to say thank you to all the positive feedback that I received with the last video. Is greatly appreciated. And moving forward, I'm definitely going to make a greater effort to put these out more consistently because, like I said, I'm glad that you enjoy them, and also I enjoy making them and putting them out for everyone as well. So for today's topic, as the title suggests, we are going to go through and review my 53-man roster prediction. So I came out with this article at Dairyland Express probably about a month ago now, once mini camp ended, just in preparation, excitement for training camp, which now fortunately is just about a week and a half away. So I'll go through each position. Obviously not going to spend a lot of time on the obvious ones, which when it comes to putting a roster together or making our predictions, whether it's the Green Bay Packers or any team for that matter, a majority of the roster spots are already going to be accounted for, but it's those fringe ones that we'll discuss more in greater detail today, and I'll give you my reasoning behind why I chose who I chose. So let's kick it off with the quarterback position. So last season, for obvious reasons, they had Jordan Love, who wasn't quite ready, and it was just an unusual offseason. The Green Bay Packers kept 3 quarterbacks on the roster. They did that as well back in 2018, I believe, with DeShone Kizer, Aaron Rodgers, and Brett Hundley. This season, I think keeping 2 quarterbacks makes sense. And yes, Aaron Rodgers is going to be there. He is going to be the starting quarterback come week 1. So I just have 2 quarterbacks on the roster, Aaron Rodgers and Jordan Love. In my opinion, I think rostering a third quarterback is a bit of a wasted roster space. Now, again, going to contradict myself a little bit. Going back to last year, because you had Love, there's an exception to every rule. And so that was the right move to make. He wasn't ready. You needed a backup in Tim Boyle to have available if needed. But this year, Jordan Love, he needs to assume those second string responsibilities, the additional reps that come with it. And I don't think it's necessary to keep a third quarterback on the roster. Now, having said all that, if the Green Bay Packers do, and I wouldn't rule it out, this is just my prediction, of course. It's not it's not the be-all, end-all by any means. But I think if they keep a third, it's going to be Kurt Benkert. I think Blake Bortles is pretty much done with in his career. He was barely on a practice squad last year in Denver. And then Jake Dogala, I just like Kurt Benkert over him and what he can offer, the additional experience that he brings. And coming out of mini camp, as Matt Schneidman of The Athletic noted, he performed pretty well, relatively speaking, as good as you can as a third quarterback with limited reps. So if they keep a third quarterback, I do like Kurt Benkert. But in my roster prediction, I got 2 of them, Aaron Rodgers and Jordan Love. Next up, let's get to running backs. This is one of those positions where the Green Bay Packers very well could keep just 3 running backs. I have 4. Reason being, we only have 2 quarterbacks instead of 3. And when we get to the tight end position, I only have 4 instead of the 5. But we'll get to my reasoning for that once we get to the tight end. So I have a couple additional roster spots to play with, and I decided to give one to the running back position. So we know Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon, they're going to be on the roster. Kylan Hill, Dexter Williams, Patrick Taylor are going to be battling for that running back 3 role. I know Kylan Hill's at least from what I've seen on the internet, the favorite to assume that role. And he very well might. I'm not saying he's not going to, but I wouldn't count out Patrick Taylor either. Yesterday, Friday at Cheesehead TV, I came out with an article where I just kind of had ramblings, I call them, a hodgepodge of thoughts where I jumped from topic to topic, and one of them was Patrick Taylor. He's someone that I really like. Like Kylan Hill, we know he's a productive runner coming out of Memphis. And for those of you unfamiliar with him, he was an undrafted rookie last year that Green Bay signed. Basically had a redshirt year. He had offseason foot surgery, and that kept him sidelined for much of the season. But he was a very productive runner at Memphis. He was a reliable pass catcher, a willing blocker. Not a ton, but was used in the slot a little bit. So that culmination of that skill set, I just think that's really a good fit for Matt LaFleur and what he wants to do. And although he didn't play last year, missed practice time with that injury, he was absorbing the playbook. He was in the team meetings. So I would not count out that experience whatsoever, especially in a Matt LaFleur offense where the running backs are tasked with a number of different responsibilities. As we saw, as we just talked about, it's not just running the ball in this offense. So I really like what Taylor can provide. And so for that reason, I kept those 4 running backs. Dexter Williams, he's just battled consistency issues and really gaining the coaching staff's trust. There were struggles with pass blocking. He's put the ball on the ground in training camp practices in the preseason, struggled with pass catching. I just don't think he has the coach's trust. And so he was the odd man out at the running back position. Next up, wide receiver. Last year, the Green Bay Packers kept 5 receivers. Once again, I have some flexibility because of the tight end room as well as the quarterback position. So I have 6. The locks, Devontae Adams, MVS, Lazard, and Amari Rodgers. We know they're going to be there. That leaves 2 spots up for grabs. I went with Malik Taylor for one of them because of his special teams experience. He had 210 special team snaps in 2020 alone. If we look at someone like Equanimeous St. Brown, he only has 60 over his entire career, which is 2 seasons, 2018 and 2020. He missed 2019 with an injury. So when you get to these back end of the roster decisions to make, especially at a position like receiver, we know those 4 guys ahead of them that I just mentioned are going to get their fair share of reps. The tight end position has 4 to 5, depending what the Packers do at the position, capable pass catchers. There's Aaron Jones out of the backfield. And I do think, while it's not going to be his primary job, I do think we're going to see more of A.J. Dillon than what some may expect in the passing game. That's a lot of pass catchers. So someone like Malik Taylor, someone like Equanimeous St. Brown is the 5th, 6th receiver on the roster. They're not going to see the field a ton. So that means they have to contribute on special teams. Malik Taylor has shown that far more than Equanimeous has. And during minicamp, and again, it's minicamp, take with a grain of salt, but Malik Taylor was the gunner on a number of the special teams reps that the Packers were practicing. That's an important position. It's the guy who's tasked with getting down the field, trying to make a play on the return man, getting any of the balls that get by him, making sure they don't go in the end zone, all of that. So it's an important position. He was getting a number of reps there. So I like him a lot for his special teams ability. The 6th spot I gave to Devin Funchess. If the Green Bay Packers keep 6 receivers, I like Funchess' odds to make the roster. I actually talked about this in the previous video. If they only keep 5, I don't, because of that inability on special teams. And maybe he has it, but over his career, he has not been a special teams contributor. Maybe in Green Bay he is. We don't know. We'll just have to see how that all plays out. So if there's 5 receivers on the roster, I like a Malik Taylor or a Juwann Winfree. He's someone that was right on the edge in this decision-making for me. Another special teams contributor and someone who popped during mini camp last month. He was, from what the reporters had to say, Matt Schneidman, Bill Huber, everyone there, they were very complimentary of Juwann Winfree and what he did as a receiver. So for that reason, if there's 5 receivers, I like the special teams ability of Winfree and Taylor over Funchess, who we'll have to see what his snap count looks like, but this isn't going to be the Devin Funchess of 2016, 2017 Carolina Panthers. It's going to be a reduced role. But with 6 receivers, I like what he can offer. It just depends, are we going to see that or not? And that's what training camp and the preseason are going to tell us. He's got that big frame. He can line up out wide in the slot. And in the slot at 6'4", 225, he's a matchup nightmare. He's someone who I could see make an impact on third downs, someone who I could see me being an impact player in the red zone. That'd be a very nice 1-2 punch with him and Aaron Rodgers. But again, can he shake off the rust? Can he pick up? How quickly will he pick up the playbook? Will he build that rapport with quarterback one? Those are all questions we don't know. He hasn't played in a regular season game since 2019, week 1. His last full season was 2018. It's been a while. There's a lot of unknown. But with 6 receiver spots available, I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt at this point. Next up, the offensive line. So our roster locks: David Bakhtiari, Elgton Jenkins, Billy Turner, Josh Myers, Royce Newman, and John Runyon, Lucas Patrick. The other spots available, so I kept 9, so that's 7 right there. And I know Lucas Patrick, I wrote an article about how he could potentially be a cut candidate, a surprise cut candidate, because the Green Bay Packers can save $2 million in cap space if they do move on from him. But we saw last year, with all of the injuries that this unit had to absorb throughout the season, the importance of offensive line depth. They were so good at adjusting, guys moving around, guys coming off the bench and stepping up, that they rarely missed a beat. So having someone like Patrick, even if he does get beat out for a starting job, is incredibly valuable off the bench. And again, 2020 was a prime example of that. Also, if you don't have Patrick on the roster, chances are you have 2 very inexperienced players At center, Josh Myers. And then at guard, potentially Ben Braden, John Runyon, Royce Newman. You have a pair of very inexperienced players right in the middle of your offensive line. And obviously, that could be worrisome. Again, we have to see how it plays out, but the thought of it is worrisome. So that's why I keep Lucas Patrick for those reasons. The other 2 roster spots go to Ben Braden. If a few weeks before I had put this together, there's zero chance Ben Braden would have been on my final 53-man roster. He's 27, 28 years old, and he's been a primary practice squad player his entire career. Very, very rarely do we see players who have been practice squad players for 4, 5, 6 years all of a sudden turn it around, become a backup or even a starter. But because of what Adam Stenavich told reporters, he believes that Braden will compete for starting reps at both guard and tackle. So for that reason, he's on my 53-man roster. The last roster spot, man, I just took a swing at this one. I went with Yosh Nijman. We don't know where he's at in his development whatsoever. There's a very real possibility that he hasn't taken that step forward that he needs to at this point. It really feels like this is a now or never summer for him. But I like how he's a true offensive tackle. Really, the only other true offensive tackle on this roster is David Bakhtiari. Everyone else is a tackle guard combo, and we know that the Packers covet that versatility, so that's not by accident by any means. But I like that he's a true tackle, and really by putting him here, I'm just taking a swing and hoping that he does take that step forward, and not that they need to rely on him to start, but at least he can be someone, hopefully, who can come off the bench if they're in a pinch and someone that they can at least trust in that situation. He really has to prove it, though, because right now, us sitting outside 1265 Lombardi Avenue, we have no idea whatsoever. The one name you might notice that I left off of here was Cole Van Lanen. I really like Cole and the potential that he has. I think that a year on the practice squad, building up that strength, getting more acclimated to the NFL level will do him well. So I think he ends up as a practice squad player. The tight end position, I had 4: Robert Tonyan, Josiah DeGuara, Mercedes Lewis, and Dominique Daphne. There's really not much to get into here on who I selected. You'll notice that Jay Sternberg is left off. Reason being because he is suspended. So the Green Bay Packers do not have to have him on the 53-man roster. Now, when he comes back after his 2 weeks are up from the suspension, if they want to put him back on the roster, at that point they'll have to make a cut to make room for him. But this is strictly the initial 53-man roster prediction, so I don't have to have him on the roster. Now, to make it a little more interesting or to take this a step further, if he wasn't suspended or at that point when he does have to return, I really do think the Green Bay Packers are going to keep 5 tight ends. I think they'll, if bringing back Jace, you could cut one of the extra receivers that I have. You could, or move to the practice squad. You could move on from or cut one of the additional running backs that I have. But I think that they like this group, and we know how important the tight end position is to Matt LaFleur. So I do think that they are going to roster 5 tight ends this season, but because of the suspension, they do not have to make that decision right away. The interior defensive line, this one's pretty straightforward. I have 5 of them: Kenny Clark, Kingsley Keke, Dean Lowry, TJ Slayton, and Tyler Lancaster. If we look at some of the other candidates that are there, there's Willington Prevalin. He was an undrafted rookie out of Rutgers from last year. I just don't think that they're really the only guy that I could see potentially having his roster spot up for grabs is Tyler Lancaster. But when comparing Lancaster to those other guys, Delonte Scott, Willington Prevalin, I'm going to go with, at this point anyways, Tyler Lancaster's experience. Next up is edge rusher. Again, 3 of those spots are locked down. So Darius Smith, Preston Smith, Rashawn Gary. Jonathan Garvin, I'm not going to Sharpie him in, but I am going to pencil him into a roster spot. I think I know he's loaded with potential, and I hope that we start to see a little bit of that this summer. So I think he'll lock down that edge rusher 4 role. Now, here's one of the more interesting moves that I made. Randy Ramsey has held down the 5th edge rusher position in 2020. I went with Tipa Galea, undrafted rookie out of Utah State last year. I just really like his game and what he can offer. He's a bit smaller than Ramsey. And if we look at the Brandon Staley defense with the Los Angeles Rams in 2020, which is what the Joe Barry defense, what we expect to mirror in a way, is that they had smaller edge rushers than what the Green Bay Packers do. You look at the Smith, Gary, 260, 270 pounds. The Rams edge rushers, they were closer to that 240 range. Typically is on the smaller side at 230, but I like the potential fit that he brings to this new system. I also like his upside as a pass rusher. He came out of Utah State with a variety of moves that he could rely on, and also being a bit smaller, there is that ability where he can work in space as well. So I like his upside. So this is one of those decisions, predictions like the Yosh Nijman, where I'm banking on potential, banking on upside, and ultimately performance is going to tell us whether we're right or not on that. Linebacker. I kept 4 linebackers. 3 of them are locks. Kamal Martin, Chris Barnes, we know they're going to be on the roster. We know Devondre Campbell's going to be as well. I know they signed him later this summer, but with the way his contract is constructed, he's got $1 million guaranteed. They added voided years to it. He's not going anywhere. This isn't a cap body that we'll bring in, we'll see how he performs, and we'll make our decision. He's going to be on this 53-man roster this year. So that leaves 1 spot available, and I gave it to 6th-rounder Isaiah McDuffie. You'll notice some notable names that are missing are Ty Summers as well as Oren Burks. Both players are solid special teams players, but I think Isaiah McDuffie can be that as well as a 6th-rounder. He's someone I expect to come in and contribute to the special teams unit right away. He has good speed, so while he's obviously not going to have the experience that Burks and Summers do, I like what he can still offer as a rookie and as an immediate contributor. And then when it comes to Burks specifically, the Packers can save about $1 million by moving on from him. This is his 4th season, and while you'd hope a new defense could rejuvenate him, I think we know who he is at this point. He's someone that has struggled in coverage, which is what the Green Bay Packers were hoping they were getting. He is a converted safety from Vanderbilt. And in the run game, once he's engaged by a blocker, he's basically taken out of the play. We just haven't seen enough on the defensive side of the ball to warrant a roster spot at this point. And while he's been solid on special teams, when the Packers, who still need cap space, by the way, can save $1 million by moving on from him, that's not enough for me to want to hang on to Oren Burks. Ty Summers, similar, a nice special teams player, but in coverage, he's not someone that you want on the field. Decent against the run, but again, when the Packers can save, I believe it's about $850,000. I like what McDuffie can offer in that regard as a special teams player. Next up is the cornerback position. So I think that there's 5 spots, not totally sharpied in, but pretty close. We know Jair Alexander, Kevin King, Eric Stokes are going to occupy 3 of those spots. I think Chandon Sullivan's pretty close to a lock as well, as is Shamar Jean-Charles. I don't expect that we see Jean-Charles contributing on the defensive side of the ball a lot this year. I think he needs that development. But again, like McDuffie, I think he's an immediate special teams contributor. Jordan Reed of the Draft Network called him a special teams ace coming out of college in his pre-draft report. So I think we'll see a lot of him on special teams, and hopefully he with McDuffie, as well as a couple other rookies in this class, can make an impact there and turn this unit around. So I kept 6 cornerbacks total. So that's 5. Alexander, King, Stokes, Sullivan, and Jean-Charles. So that leaves 1 more available. I didn't give it to Josh Jackson. Similarly to Oren Burks, the Packers can save some cap space by moving on from him. I believe it's about $1.2 million. And again, it's year 4. I think we know who he is at this point. Could the Joe Barry system revitalize him? It's more zone heavy, which we all think will help benefit him. But I think we know who he is at this point. The same issues he had his rookie season, we still see those very prominent in 2020 when he was on the field during Kevin King's injury early on. Another key point, and perhaps the kicker, as I call it in all of this, is that he was a healthy scratch at the end of last year. The end of the season, into the playoffs, he was a healthy scratch, meaning the Packers didn't think he was going to contribute defensively, and they also didn't think he was going to contribute on special teams, which, going back to Thursday's video, if you're a back end of the roster player who's not going to see a ton of playing time, but you're also not going to contribute on special teams, that's almost a wasted roster spot. And so for those reasons, I don't think Josh Jackson is going to make the final cut. Another player, returning player, who I don't think is going to make it either, is Kadar Hallman. I was a big Kadar Hallman fan coming out of Toledo. He was very well versed in press man coverage. We know that that's a fairly big component of the Mike Pettine defensive system, but he didn't see much playing time. So there is still some mystery to him, some unknown. We don't exactly know where he's at in his development, but he didn't see much playing time. There is, as I mentioned, this is going to be a more zone-heavy defensive scheme. So now we bring into question, how is he going to transition to that, being a primary man cover corner coming out of Toledo. And again, like Josh Jackson, he was a healthy scratch at the end of the year, which to me speaks volumes. So I'm not keeping Kadar Holman. I'm not keeping Josh Jackson, but I am keeping Kabianento. I really, really like Kabianento, and I think the Green Bay Packers do as well. He's actually a converted wide receiver from the University of Colorado, went undrafted in 2019 before signing with Green Bay. And in his 2019 camp, 2020 camp, he's made a lot of plays. He stood out so much so that the Green Bay Packers put him on the initial 53-man roster last year. So he hurt his foot at the end of camp and ended up on IR. But by the Green Bay Packers placing him on the 53-man roster and then to IR, what that did was it allowed him the opportunity to return. Now, he never did. I think he came back for a few practices at the end of the year, but that says a lot. Just like how it says a lot, speaks volumes, as I said, that the Green Bay Packers had Jackson and Kadar Holman as healthy scratches. It speaks volumes about what they think of Kabianento, that they put him on the 53-man roster because they wanted him to return. They at least wanted to have that opportunity. And if we look ahead to minicamp, or this past minicamp about a month ago, he was, again, like Malik Taylor, one of the primary gunners on special teams. So he's a special teams contributor, playing an important role on special teams. And going back to last year, being put on the roster for IR, it really shows what the Green Bay Packers do think of him. 2 more to go. Safety. So I kept 5 safeties. Adrian Amos and Darnell Savage, we know, are locks. I think Will Redmond's pretty close to a lock as well. I know some fans don't want to hear that after how the NFC Championship game went and just after some of the struggles he's had. But he really is a young player. Last season was his first real season of seeing meaningful playing time. And again, he's a special teams contributor, which is important. And I know I talked about it last week. I've talked about it a few times here. But when we're deciding these back end of the roster spots, special teams contributions are important. And he's been a very solid, a very reliable special teams player for them the last 2 seasons. On top of that, Jerry Gray mentioned that there's 4 or 5 guys at the moment competing for snaps in the slot and that star cornerback role. Their hope is to get it down to 1 or 2 by the time week 1 rolls around. There's been nothing that's been said to point to Will Redmond being one of those 4 or 5 players, but I think he is. He took a third of his snaps last year from the slot, and again, he's a versatile, athletic defender. I think the Green Bay Packers still want to see what they have in him. So, as the old saying goes, where there's smoke, there's fire. I think there's a lot of smoke around Will Redmond, so I think he's going to be on this roster. Vernon Scott from TCU, he's someone that I wouldn't be surprised to step up into that safety 3 role this season for the Green Bay Packers. Coming out of TCU, he's well-versed under Gary Patterson in that 2 high safety look, and that's what we're going to see a lot of under Joe Barry. He's a willing tackler, comfortable playing coastal line of scrimmage in the box, also versatile, took snaps in the slot box as a free safety, both last year. Again, a limited snap count. I think he had less than 100 total snaps. But if you go back and look at TCU, he was moved around quite a bit as well. So I think he's a good fit for this new system. He's someone that I'll have my eyes on and someone that I could see as the season progresses taking on a bigger role within this defense. The 5th spot I gave to Henry Black, who was an undrafted rookie out of Baylor last year, spent time on the practice squad as well as the 53-man roster. Again, similar to Scott, special teams player last year. I think he was on the field again, 80, 90 snaps, somewhere in that ballpark. But I chose him over Christian Uphoff, who I know is a popular undrafted rookie name this season. And he's a good fit for the system as well. Illinois State plays a lot of 2 high safety. He was a ball hawk during his 2019 season, but ultimately I went with Black because of the experience. It's only 1 year experience, but Uphoff, his 1 year of true production at Illinois State came in 2019. The 2020 season for the Missouri Valley Football Conference was canceled. So this is a young player and an experienced player who hasn't played in almost 2 years now in a competitive game. So at this point, again, performance is going to be king, but at this point where we're standing, I'm going to go with experience over the unknown. Lastly, we get to our specialists. Shouldn't be any surprise here. Mason Crosby, J.K. Scott, and Hunter Bradley. I know there's a punter in for training camp to compete with Scott, there's also a long snapper in as well. And who knows, maybe one of them, maybe both of them beat out the incumbents. But at this point, I haven't seen Ryan Winslow punt. I haven't seen Joe Fortunato snap the ball. And even if I did, not going to sit here and pretend I could dissect it and tell you who's better. But me picking one of them to knock off, take a roster spot from Scott or Bradley would be me just doing that for the sake of doing it. Maybe it happens, maybe it doesn't. But for the time being, because we really don't know, I'm going to stick with J.K. Scott and Hunter Bradley. So, we made it. So that was my 53-man roster prediction. I'm going to plan on coming out with one of these before the actual roster is released, once we have some training camps under our belt, some preseason games, and we can kind of see where some of these dominoes fall. But until then, as always, I appreciate you guys joining me. I'll be back soon with another video on another fun topic. Until then, take care, stay safe, and as always, go Pack Go.